When this dog kept swimming out into the ocean, the owner tried to stop him. However, the dog wouldn't listen, and when his owner finally realized why, he burst into tears. "Ben, wait! Where are you running to?" Pat shouted as he tried to stop his dog from running. Pat carefully weaved through the gathering of tourists and residents and tried to ignore the curious looks they were giving him. His major priority was to figure out where Ben was going and do everything in his power to prevent his dog and best friend from getting hurt. As Pat continued to follow his dog carefully, he couldn't help but notice that they were slowly moving away from the residential area and approaching the beach. He was a bit confused as he watched Ben race to the shore excitedly. The two had visited the beach a couple days ago, and ever since then, Ben had been agitated and restless. Pat was worried that his dog had gotten sick, and they were on their way to the vet when Ben suddenly started running and barking excitedly. As the dog drew closer to the shores of the beach, his pace slowed down until he finally came to a halt a few meters away from the sea. Ben approached very carefully, first dipping one of his paws into the water. After what seemed like a moment of hesitation, Ben dove into the water and soon began to swim away from the shore. Pat called out to his dog, yelling for the dog to return back to shore, but his words fell on deaf ears. The dog turned around to look at Pat briefly before he continued swimming farther away from the shore. Pat, with a surprised look on his face, continued to watch as Ben went even deeper into the water. People around were watching, curious about what was happening. A lifeguard approached Pat and asked if there was anything he could do to help. He had watched as Pat chased down his dog and could see that Pat was tired after the chase. The lifeguard was willing to go into the water and bring Ben back to shore. However, Pat declined the offer. Since the last time they came to this beach, there was something that fascinated his dog, and Pat wanted to find out what it was. He watched as Ben continued to paddle around in the water and let out small barks. The dog looked around its surroundings as if it was waiting for someone or something, and Pat watched with bated breath to see what would happen. He told the lifeguard that ever since he had brought him home, the dog always looked for ways to get out of taking a bath and always displayed a certain level of anxiety whenever he had to be close to any body of water. This was the first time that Ben had gotten into water of his own will, which was a big surprise to Pat. He was certain that his dog might have found something concerning in the water, and that was why he reacted this way. He also told the lifeguard that even if they brought Ben out of the water, there was no guarantee that this wouldn't happen again when they least expected it. The lifeguard went back to his post while Pat waited eagerly to see what was in the water that excited his dog so much. Minutes later, the water around the dog began to move even more. Something was approaching, and Pat couldn't take his eyes away from what was happening. There was a sudden splash in the water beside him. Then, a gray nose appeared out of the water. Pat immediately took his phone out of his pocket to capture the moment. He could also notice that others around him were starting to pay more attention to the dog in the water and the unusual interaction that was about to take place. These types of situations were rare in Tory Island, where Pat called home. It was a small island just off the coast of County Donegal, Ireland, and had a population of about 150 people. Pat worked remotely, and once in a while, he would head into the major town to do some work or visit friends and family. When he informed his family of his desire to live on Tory Island, they looked at him with disbelief and tried to convince him. But his mind was made up. Pat had visited Tory Island multiple times as a tourist and unexpectedly fell in love with the place. Even though it was small, with almost everyone knowing one another, it was one of the most peaceful and serene places he had ever visited. He enjoyed being able to take long, relaxing walks, and after living in Dublin for most of his life, it was a change that he didn't know he was ready for. Pat was lucky enough to find a home on the island that he could rent and moved to the island days after getting the home. However, he wasn't aware that his life was going to change even more. After 3 months of living on the island, Pat returned back to pay a visit to his family and enjoy some time with them before going back home. He had a harder time adjusting than he thought he would and often found himself missing the comforts of the city and being close to his family. But one day, as he was returning home from running some errands, he saw a dog lying helplessly on the streets. It would stand up when people passed by and tried to solicit help and some food, but it was always rejected. Pat had never seen the dog before and assumed that it had been recently abandoned. As he saw the dog lying on the street, looking for ways to fend for itself, something clicked in Pat. He had never owned a pet before, but he couldn't bring himself to walk away. He went into one of the nearby stores to get some dog treats and approached the dog. Then, he opened the can he got and placed it in front of the creature. The dog looked at him briefly before accepting his offer. Pat took the dog home with him and the next day took the dog to a vet for a checkup. Thankfully, the vet confirmed that the dog was healthy and was just a little malnourished from living on the streets. Pat continued to care for the dog and gradually bonded with the animal. They started to spend a lot of time together and Pat named it Ben. When it was time to return back to the island, Pat took Ben back with him. He was worried that the dog would have a difficult time adjusting to the change of environment. To his surprise, Ben fell in love with Tory Island just as he did and often enjoyed running around, even without Pat being with him. The two would often go to the beach to take in the sights and interact with other residents, but Ben never ventured too close to the water. He seemed to have a fear of it, and nothing Pat did could get the dog into the water. But one sunny afternoon, Pat went to the beach and brought Ben along with him. They saw a crowd gathering and chatting among themselves, and Pat went by to see what was happening. They were all watching a dolphin move around in the water as it made soft whistling sounds. The dolphin started coming by the beach a few days ago, and the residents believed that it was there for a reason. Around the time that the dolphin appeared, the lifeguards found a male dolphin washed up on shore. It was already dead by the time they found it. Since dolphins mate for life, the dolphin stayed around to mourn its loved one and refused to swim away. While he chatted with the crowd, Pat couldn't help but notice that Ben was staring intensely at the dolphin as well. He seemed intrigued by its presence and only took his eyes away when the dolphin disappeared back into the water. After this incident, Pat noticed that Ben began to become more excited on the days when they would visit the beach and often stayed on the shore, anxiously watching and waiting for the dolphin to appear. But his fear of the ocean meant that the dog didn't enter the water. Today was the first time that he ever attempted to do so. Pat was shocked. When the owner realized why his dog entered the water, he burst into tears. The gray nose that Pat spotted retreated back into the water, and a few seconds later, the dolphin appeared again, leaping out of the water. It was swimming happily around Ben. The two began to frolic in the sea, and they swam together side by side. It looked like the dolphin didn't mind the dog being so close to it, and in fact, seemed to crave the connection. Even though this was their first time meeting, it was like the Labrador and the dolphin already knew each other and had a deep understanding. It was as if Ben had sensed the dolphin's grief and was trying to help it recover from the loss of its mate. Pat burst into tears in awe of his beloved dog. The Labrador looked on as the dolphin bobbed in and out of the water, making happy clicking sounds. Everyone gathered around taking pictures and marveled at the strange but wonderful sight. This was the first time that anything like this happened in Tory Island, and it was definitely needed to cut through the normalcy of the island. The dolphin and Ben continued to play together happily until it finally started to swim away. Ben waited until the dolphin was completely gone before it came out of the water. It ran straight to Pat, and the man bent down and gave his dog a big hug, ignoring his very wet fur. The dog started to bark happily and licked Pat's face before the man finally stood up. Many people wanted to take pictures and pet this incredible dog, and Pat allowed them to do so until it was time to return home. However, just as they were about to leave the beach, someone walked up to them. He held a camera in his hand and introduced himself as Smith. Smith worked as a photographer and was on Tory Island for a few days. He came because he wanted to capture the beauty of the island as well as the everyday lives of the people who live there. He was on the beach when Ben and Pat appeared and started filming them as soon as he noticed them running. After capturing the entire experience, he was struck by how memorable it was and wondered if Pat would want the video to remember the experience. Pat was elated by the news as it marked a day that he was never going to forget. But this wouldn't be the last time Ben would meet his aquatic friend. After this event, the Labrador suddenly developed a love for the ocean and would spend 3 hours in the water several times a day. The dolphin always appeared whenever Ben was near, and the two would always play together before it was time for them to go their separate ways. Because of this friendship, the dolphin never left the waters around Tory Island for long, and the residents believed that it had started to consider it her home. Occasionally, a school of dolphins will pass by and she would join them, but when they thought she had forgotten about the island, the dolphin always returned. She had all the love and fun she needed. She was named Doggy, and the friendship between her and Ben continues to thrive. Nothing can keep them apart for too long, and their bond is proof that you can find friendship in the most unlikely places. What an incredible story! Do you think Pat should let his dog become friends with the dolphin? Share your thoughts in the comments and see you in the next video.